Mrs. Okeke, your mother's vitals have stabilized. We are seeing some signs of improvement. As Nkechi continued to nurture her newfound relationship with God, she couldn't help but notice that her circumstances hadn't changed much. Emeka still hadn't found a job, and their financial situation was getting more precarious by the day. Bills were piling up, and the once comfortable life they had enjoyed seemed to be slipping away. One night, as Nkechi sat in her date spot, she cried out to God in frustration. Lord, I have been faithful. I have trusted you without asking for anything in return. But things are getting worse. I don't know how much more I can take. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in weeks, Nkechi felt a wave of doubt wash over her. She had been so sure that trusting God would bring peace. But now, she wondered if she had been fooling herself. Perhaps Adobe's advice had been nothing more than wishful thinking. But as she sat there, something inside her refused to let go. She thought about all the moments of peace she had experienced in the past weeks. The times when she felt God's presence so close that it was almost tangible. Those moments hadn't been an illusion. Neither was her faith. As Nkechi wiped her tears, she felt a new resolve forming within her. She would continue to trust. Even if she didn't understand, she would hold on to God. Not because of what He would do for her, but because she knew He loved her, and that love was worth everything. The next morning, Nkechi went about her routine with renewed determination. She kissed her children goodbye, exchanged a few words with Emeka, and left for work. The day was hectic as usual, but something felt different. Despite the challenges, Nkechi felt a strange sense of calm, as if a storm was brewing out, but she was sheltered from the worst effect. That evening, after another stressful day, Nkechi received a phone call from her mother's caregiver. Her mother had been rushed to the hospital after a sudden collapse. Panic gripped Nkechi as she hurried to the hospital. Her heart pounding in her chest, she prayed fervently, begging God to spare her mother's life. When she arrived, the doctor was waiting for her. His expression was sober, and Nkechi felt her knees go weak. Mrs. Okeke, your mother suffered a severe stroke. We have done everything we can, but she's in a coma. It's too early to say if she will recover. Nkechi felt the ground shift beneath her. The weight of everything that had been building up finally crashing down. Her mother, the one person who had always had her back, was now fighting for her life. Nkechi couldn't imagine a world without her mother in it. She felt like she was losing everything. As she sat by her mother's bedside, holding her hands and whispering prayers, Nkechi felt completely broken. She had been strong for so long, but now she wasn't sure how to keep going. She thought of her children, her husband, her job, and now her mother. It was all too much. But even in her despair, a small voice inside her whispered, "Trust me. Trust me." Days turned into weeks, and Nkechi found herself living in a state of constant fear. She visited her mother every day praying for a miracle, but there was no change. Emeka tried to be supportive, but his own struggles made it difficult for him to be fully present. They were both hurting, and it was driving them further apart. One afternoon, as Nkechi sat by her mother's bedside, she felt a familiar presence, one she had come to realize and recognize during her time in her date spot. She closed her eyes and allowed the warmth of God's love to wash over her. It was as if he was sitting right there with her, holding her hand, whispering that everything would be okay. For the first time in weeks, Nkechi felt peace. It wasn't the peace that came from believing everything would be fixed, but the peace that came from knowing that she wasn't alone, no matter what happened. She whispered a prayer, "Lord, I trust you even in this. I trust you because you love me and I love you too." As she sat there, a nurse entered the room. "Mrs. Okeke, your mother's vitals have stabilized. We are seeing some signs of improvement, but it's still too early to be sure." Nkechi looked at the nurse, her heart pounding. Improvement? Could it be that her mother was going to make it? She felt a surge of hope. She quickly reminded herself not to get ahead of things. One day at a time, she said. Over the next few days, her mother's condition continued to improve. The doctors were optimistic, but Nkechi knew that something miraculous was happening. Slowly but surely, her mother began to regain consciousness, and within a week, she was awake and responsive, though still weak. The day her mother opened her eyes and smiled at her, Nkechi broke down in tears. She thanked God over and over, feeling his presence more strongly than ever. It wasn't just the miracle of her mother's recovery. It was the miracle of her renewed faith, the realization that God had been with her every step of the way, even when she couldn't see it. As her mother continued to recover, Nkechi noticed other changes happening in her life. Emeka, who had been distant and irritable for so long, began to soften. He started to open up to her about his own struggles, admitting that he had felt like a failure since losing his job and didn't know how to cope with it. Nkechi listened with compassion, understanding his pain in a way she hadn't before. Their conversation, once filled with tension and resentment, became more honest and loving. They began to pray together, something they hadn't done in years. Slowly, the walls that had built up between them began to crumble, and they started to rebuild their relationship on a foundation of mutual trust and faith. One day, as they sat together after dinner, Emeka took Nkechi's hand. "Nkechi, I've been thinking, maybe losing my job wasn't the end of the world. It's giving me time to rethink what I really want to do with my life." I've been considering starting my own business. Something small, but something I'm passionate about. Nkechi smiled, squeezing his hands. That sounds like a great idea, Emeka. I believe in you, and I know God will guide you in this. With Nkechi's support, Emeka began to take steps towards starting his own business. It wasn't easy, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose and hope. Nkechi continued to support him while balancing her work and responsibilities at home. Their partnership became stronger than it had ever been, as they leaned on each other and on God. At work, things also began to shift. Nkechi's performance improved as she found a renewed sense of purpose and clarity. She no longer feared the responsibility of being laid off, knowing that whatever happened, she would be okay. Her superiors took notice of her hard work and dedication, and instead of being laid off, Nkechi was offered a promotion. It was an unexpected blessing that confirmed to her that God was in control, even in the most uncertain situations. Months passed and Nkechi's life was unrecognizable from where it had been a year ago. Her mother had fully recovered. Emeka's business was slowly gaining traction, and their marriage was stronger than ever. The financial struggles they had once faced were easing, and there was a sense of peace and joy in their home that hadn't been there for a long time. Nkechi continued to visit her date spot daily, but now her prayers and her silence were filled with gratitude. She had learned to trust God, not just in good times, but also in the difficult times. She had discovered that true peace didn't come from having everything she wanted, but from knowing that she was loved by God no matter what. She and Adobe became closer friends, often talking about their faith and how God was working in their lives. They even started a small prayer group with their colleagues, where they would share their struggles and support each other in the place of prayer. The group became a source of strength for many, a reminder that they were never alone in their challenges. Nkechi had come to realize that the trials she had faced were not meant to break her, but to build her faith. She had been visited by the Most High in a supernatural way, in the quiet moments of her everyday life, where she learned to trust and love God with her whole heart. This story teaches us that true trust comes without condition. Nkechi learned that trusting God isn't about expecting Him to fix all her problems, but loving Him for who He is. When we trust God unconditionally, we find peace, even in the midst of our struggles. The story also teaches us about the power of community. Adobe's supports and encouragements were crucial in Nkechi's journey. It showed us the importance of surrounding ourselves with people who can build our faith.